EA is now on Twitch. Join us Wednesday nights when Alistair reads a bedtime story, and Sunday mornings for a few hours of chill casual gaming, plus interviews, special guests, pickup streams, and more. Visit twitch.tv/EA Podcasts and follow us to be notified when we go live, plus access VODs of past broadcasts.
Escape Pod, Episode 982, Twilight, by Lily Harper.
Hello and welcome to Escape Pod. I'm Mer Lafferty, your co-editor and host for our latest story, Twilight, by Lily Harper. Lily is a science fiction writer, space artist, and debonair transsexual who, perhaps because of a great sin committed in a past life, was born in the UK. Her work blends transhumanist themes and technical obsession with her background in political science and philosophy. This is her first published piece of work. It's narrated for us by Kat Day. Kat is a PhD chemist who was once a teacher and is now a professional editor and writer. She ventured into Pseudopod Towers in 2019 and became an assistant editor in 2021 and deputy editor in 2025. The best place to find her is on Blue Sky at chronicleflask.catday.com. And you can read her regular flash fiction offerings at The Fictional File, that's PHIAL.wordpress.com. This story first ran on Lily's personal writing blog, beaconsinthedark.wordpress.com. But keep calling out into the abyss because someone might be listening and because it's story time.
Twilight by Lily Harper. Narrated by Kat Day. Like the tide going out, the dream slipped between her toes and carried with it the smell of petrichor and the sound of birdsong. Even without knowing she was dreaming, she had known she was waking up, the subliminal chatter of her body quietly running its routine checksums, the logs spooling their barren monologue into her working memory. First came a few moments of groggy confusion, and then, like an iron hand gripping her cognitive architecture, a kind of clarity that tasted like resentment and reminded her of Monday mornings. Waking up always felt like this, packed down as she was, crammed into a processor too small to carry her, like a spring wound tight. Waking up wasn't a continuous transformation so much as a discrete toggle, like a light switch. Akia opened her eyes and heard the forever wind blowing mournfully across the dunes, the soft creaking of the local flora, which had evolved, it seemed, to harvest energy from the permanent gale. Her cameras clicked and popped, adjusting their focus. Slowly crouching to keep her centre of gravity low, Akia climbed out of the burrow and crested the sandy crease of the ridge garden. Ahead spilled an alien vista no human eyes had ever seen before, and she wondered if it was a little selfish to think, hopefully never would. With its weathered dunes and rocky steps, the ridge garden overlooked a wide plain split into two raggedly uneven halves by a lush river valley. The plains were paved with colonies of dark, ground cover plants which used a greasy black photopigment in place of chlorophyll. A permanent sentinel in the sky, the sun hung low and bloody to the north. Myers Survey 3, Twilight, the science team in orbit were calling it, was one of maybe half a dozen planets in all the space humanity had spread to that was home to its own native ecosystem. And Twilight's was by far the most complex and robust, orbiting one of 100 billion no-name red dwarfs in the Milky Way. Twilight was tidally locked, the sun never rose or set, and day and night were permanent and deadly fixtures of the planet's environment. To the north, a seething desert. To the south, an ice cap, 8 miles thick. Only between the two, in a narrow, windy band around the planet's equator, was the environment temperate enough for complex life to survive. It was an achingly beautiful place to be, and still, Akir had been dreaming of Earth, of sunsets and soil and the singing of birds. She began to walk, trundling along the ridge garden and doing her best not to trample any of the local life. As she did, she paged through her logs, checking for any reported errors. The hydraulic lines in her right arm were thinning and might be an issue in another 1,000 hours or so. Her left knee, which had been binding as a wiry local plant tried to colonise it, wasn't showing any signs of locking up again since she'd last cleaned it. Her power supply, printed from a common pattern, Azure Cooperative's Open RTG version 0.8, was still green and would be for another 95 years, the slug of plutonium-238 churning out a couple of 100 watts as it decayed. But one of her redundant capacitors was throwing errors. She hesitated and then put in a call. The survey ship, Society of Consent, an interstellar line layer with a crew of 60, wasn't anywhere in the sky and the satellites were down again. Something about the ways that Twilight's magnetosphere interacted with the local solar wind made communications unpredictable, one of 100 mysteries they didn't have the time or the manpower to solve. Without lungs, Akir's sigh was a heaving of her shoulders as she trudged. Thump, thump, adjust, thump, across the landscape, stepping between the slab-like pavements of platifettes that scabbed the ground, their skins as dark and deep as night and subtly ridged, reminding her of the underside of mushroom caps. Society of Consent was still beyond the horizon. That was fine. She could wait. It was another 3 hours before her link with the survey ship flickered yellow and then pulsed a deep and steady green. Akir had marched a steady 1/2 kilometre or so across the landscape, winding her way down and into the lush river valley. Most of the plants even here were low, round plates, but more commonly among them now were their taller cousins, tiered black things that made her think of layer cakes. The water seemed serene. No fish, her cameras and motion sensors were picking up, except for a handful of whip snakes, tall, reedy plants that danced in the wind. She glanced up at the sky and caught a glimpse of the survey ship, barely more than a lopsided star, slowly wandering over the horizon. If it hadn't been for the bracket superimposed over it by her comm system, she might have mistaken it for a moon or a distant planet. A voice, rendered thin and fluting by interference, cut through the wind-swept silence. "Calling for Akir? This is Riley Casper, electromechanical technician and ground support, grade B. You mentioned a fault in your logs?" The woman had a nice voice, her vowels clipped by an old Ceres accent. "Good morning, Riley," Akir thought at the wandering star. "Is it morning where you are? I lose track of the shifts on the Society. I'm reading an issue in my interior capacitor bank, 8% losses on charge-discharge. I've also got an issue with the hydraulics in my right arm, but it's not pressing." Light delay to the Society of Consent's orbit wasn't much, maybe 1/100th of a second, but between interference, signal compression, and the slow grinding of computer hardware unpacking everything, the effective lag time was on the order of a 1/4 second. Akir stopped to contemplate the view. "Yes," Riley said, pulling the word out into 3 long syllables. "Yes, you've reported in the hydraulics issue before, 6 weeks ago by our logs. Any loss in function?" Akir checked her range of motion. "Doesn't look like it, but the rate of leaching into the hydraulic fluid looks higher than anticipated. Thought you ought to know. The power thing?" Another delay. Gotcha, Keir. Capacitor wear like that is a little worrying, but if it's only hitting one of your banks, it should be fine. The mechanic hesitated. Send us your logs, just to be safe, though. If it comes down to it, we can look at airdropping you a replacement. She beamed a copy of her system log to the survey ship, trying to ignore the way doing so made her feel weirdly exposed. Confirm sent. Confirmed receipt. And I'll send this one to one of our code monkeys. They'll go over it with a fine-tooth comb and find out what's up, okay? Great. Thanks. The wind moaned through the valley, and the stalks of the whip snakes danced in it gamely. Something darted through the water in response, as though surprised, so maybe there were fish here. Some local fauna called out, chittering like someone jabbed a pencil in an electric fan, and a moment later something responded on the far side of the gully. One of the weird towering layer cake plants spasmed, a fibrous network of bioluminescent cells stuttering to life, hoping to attract some animal to help it pollinate. Suddenly, Akir wanted desperately not to be the only thing to see this, to feel this, to hear this. Is that everything I could do for you, Akir? She hesitated. Ground support means you're cross-trained, doesn't it, Riley? Everyone on the mission is, to some extent, but yes, electromech is my main field, but I've also got a working knowledge of some of the exobiology stuff. The woman's pause might not have even existed, except Akir definitely felt it. Somehow, without changing, the woman's voice suddenly sounded more gentle. Psychology, too. She realised she hadn't said anything for a moment. If she still had breath, Akir would have found she was holding it. It's quiet here. That's why you came, isn't it? Riley said, her voice crushingly, punishingly gentle. To get away from everything. I didn't call to talk about me, just maintenance. The mechanic made a clicking noise, tongue against teeth. Akir hadn't had a body in so long that the sudden profound sense that she had a tongue of her own, that she could feel the roof of her own mouth, was somewhere between dizzying and nauseating. Some distant, detached part of her mind wondered if there was something wrong with her. You know, this is just another kind of maintenance, Akir. When she didn't reply, the woman went on. Why don't you show me how quiet it is? Akir pushed against her reluctance like she was trying to press magnets together, her emotions a field effect in her mind. Exposed or isolated, which feeling was worse? She opened the link, chewing through bandwidth, and soon Riley was seeing something like what Akir was, grainier maybe and through a screen on a spaceship, but still. The water burbling through a brook on an alien world, the chittering, the call and repeat game of animal mating rituals as familiar as birds singing serenades. That wind, God's long, great exhalation, driven by the heat of the sun and the cold of night. Suddenly, remembering the feeling of surf between her toes from the dream, Akir felt the urge to break protocol. She waded into the shallow edge of the stream, steel feet in the water. The cold felt about right and came with the illusion that she still had toenails, the cold biting at them with a pain that was not entirely unpleasant. Every day, Akir said, I stand somewhere nobody else has ever been before. I find a dozen new species no human has ever named or catalogued. Not some bacterium in pond water either, but whole clades of new, wonderful life. This beautiful, empty world sings to me its mournful, mindless winged song. And, besides the others like me, I'm the only thing even distantly related to a human being who has ever heard it, ever lived with it. And when I sleep, because even uploaded minds sleep, whole brain emulation means whole brain. It's in the name. I dream not of frost-bound oceans of the southern reach, or of the sheltered bays to the northern sea, where mimic frogs have learned to repeat the hiss of my hydraulic legs, but of Earth, of being human again, or else of being something better, something whole. You came from Earth? Riley made a soft noise in the back of her throat. When was the last time you were there? I haven't run the numbers on that, but it would have been, a decade after I died and shed my skin, after the procedure, not accounting for relativistic effects. 6, almost 700 years? Suddenly she felt terribly self-conscious. 7 feet tall and weighing almost 400 kilos. Akia hugged herself. God, I'm old. The woman laughed. Yes, you are. And strangely, that made it all right. You came all the way out here, Riley said, slowly, like she was working it out as she said it. And it's wonderful and mournful, and more than that, it means something. And all you can think about is somewhere you left behind so long ago that perhaps nowhere you set foot would be recognisable now. You were born in the 20th century. Earth now is as far from what you grew up with as the 100 Years' War or the fall of Constantinople was. So it's a past that can't come back. Neither of them spoke. A paddle glider, a local animal she'd been the first to discover 7 years ago, darted across the river, a blur of black and pink and structural blue. Why did you come out here, Akia? I lost something. I can talk about everything else, but I'm still not ready to talk about that. That's okay. I lost something, Akia said again, harder than she meant to, and pushing through the sudden profound tension in a chest she no longer had. And I couldn't bear to be seen again, couldn't bear to be around people. I felt like I'd been skinned raw by what I lost, and every touch hurt. Grief. I've read that some uploads turned themselves into observatories on long and lonely orbits around distant suns, relying on gravity lensing to image distant galaxies. Others retreat to distant Oort clouds and Kuiper belts, burrowing deep into cold worldlets that straddle the heliopause for some peace and quiet. But I couldn't do either of those things. More than anything, I needed to feel, not my grief. I don't know if I can ever face that, but I needed to be in a place where I could hear the wind and taste the air and feel the water between my toes and know it was real. Not a memory, not virtual. And that was here. Twilight. And yet here you are, Riley said, talking to me. I'm lonely, Akia said. Yes, you are. You know, it's not that weird of a feeling, if you think about it. We're all out here because we're lonely. Akia crouched, lowered her right hand into the water. She saw 3 steel fingers, improbably dexterous despite their heavy-duty segmented design. But when rubber grips kissed cold water, she felt 5 fingertips burn with cold. Idly she dragged her hand first one way and then the other, gently. Something swam up, a fish with a nose like a mosquito, and then darted away. What? Life in the universe shit, Akia replied. Man ventures boldly into space to ask, are we alone? Well, sure, we travelled, 15, 16 light years? All to come study from orbit a planet we can't even set foot on the off chance something lived here that was interesting, or even, maybe, wanted to say hello. Shit, Akia, at least you actually get to be there. She heard the depth of the woman's terrible longing, but Riley didn't stop talking. Anyway, sure, that's true, but we're also all here because we're the sort of people who can spend a couple of decades unplugged from interstellar society. No homes, no family, no obligations. Not exactly a normal psychological profile. And all of this, dreaming of Earth, being so desperate for connection you faked a fault report, do you know what I think it means? That I can't even get brooding on an alien planet right, Akir said dryly. Ha! You deflect with humour when you have to deal with your emotions, Riley said. I know that trick well and I'm not falling for it. No, what it means is you've grown, piece by piece, day by day. That you can be lonely again is a sign that you're healing. Maybe not into what you were before you lost whatever it is you lost. Maybe never that. But you are healing. You have been, and you didn't even know it. It's ironic, I know, but you're not alone. Like old rope, Riley's voice began to fray. Communications issues? Looks like it. Solar activity. Give me a second. Faintly, Akir heard the woman punching her keyboard, typing so fast it sounded like someone had poured 100 dice down some cut stone steps. Eggheads are saying it'll be another 6 or 7 hours before we get a clear channel. Twilight's sun isn't quite a flare star, but it's unusually active. The apology in the technician's voice made Akir's heart ache. It's okay, she said. Do you mind if I call you again sometime? Riley's voice was almost more static than speech. Not at all. The bracket around the survey ship, high in orbit, flickered yellow. A moment later, filaments of green and gold and red drew themselves faintly across the sky. Akir wondered if human eyes would have been able to pick up the subtle colours of the solar storm, or if they were only visible thanks to some camera trick. You have been healing, Akir thought to herself, and you didn't even know it. She shifted her weight and stepped out of the cold, cold river.
And that was Twilight by Lily Harper. It struck me that the two characters in this story find themselves longing for the other's situation or experience. Riley longs to see what Akir sees, but she's also jealous of Akir's memories of the Earth. Akir just longs for healing and communication. However, they both chose their situation, which shows us simply that there's no situation, even if you choose it, that will be perfect. I think the human brain's need for frequent change applies here, because no matter how perfect your current situation is, eventually you will get bored of it and long for a change. And while space travel sounds like an amazing adventure to us here on the ground, very few people portray it in a way that makes travel over an impossibly long distance not seem as dull as hell. It reminds me of the movie 2001 because the first time I watched it, I felt incredibly lonely. That these men were living together in space, but never speaking. Then I figured if I were on that ship, I would probably be spaced far earlier than Hal's malfunction because I would be talking nonstop to fill the silence. Thank you for listening to Escape Pod. It's a production of Escape Artists Incorporated and is distributed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. Share it, don't change it, don't charge for it. All other rights are reserved by our authors. We live on your donations. If you can support us monetarily, you will support all of the Escape Artists podcasts and everybody who works on them. If you can do that, check us out at escapepod.org to learn how you can donate via PayPal, Patreon, Twitch, and more. Or if you have a question, directly email donations@escapeartists.net. Depending on where you live, your donation might be tax deductible. And if you can't give monetarily, leave a review or tell a friend. Thank you for supporting our mission to bring free and accessible speculative fiction to a global audience. We've been doing this for almost 20 years, thanks to you. Our music is by permission of Daikaiju. You can hear more from them at daikaiju.org. That was our show for this week. Our quote comes from Joseph Campbell. It is by going down into the abyss that we recover the treasures of life. Where you stumble there lies your treasure. Stay safe, and as Vonnegut so eloquently put it, God damn it, you've got to be kind. We'll see you next week.